Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Anitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, as well as uploading it as a YouTube video on the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, on top of it being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. Please feel free to leave a rating, like, follow, subscribe, review, whatever, depending on your platform of choice that you're listening on if you want to help support the podcast. Today, I'm back with my special guest from last week, Mark, and we are going to be talking a little bit about Digimon's organized play. Just because I am a competitive Digimon player, or at least I like to think of myself as a competitive one, and this usually is a near and dear topic to my heart because I participate in competitive events all the time. So before we get into that, we do have some more metadata. So last time I kind of gave the top 8 for the Texas regional, but we actually have more data on that one, so I could kind of just quickly re-go over it. So instead of top 8, I actually have the full top 16. Usually, if anyone's actually curious where I'm pulling all this information from, it's just Eggman Events, because that's the place that it generally is posted to, outside of Facebook, like a couple of weeks later after the event has already happened. But Eggman also has all of the deck lists in case you're interested in looking at that, as well as more than what Bandai generally gives us when they post. So as far as the Texas regional goes, the top 16 archetypes, we have 3 Security Control, 3 Red Hybrids, 2 Numemon, 2 Lugimon, 1 Belphmon, 1 Rapidmon, 1 Leviamon X, 1 Mirage, 1 Diva, and 1 Vmon Armor. So that's your top 16 there. Then, as far as what actually won that event, we already know last time what the top 8 was. So, first was Numemon, second was Security Control, third was Security Control, fourth was Belphmon, fifth was Mega Gargamon or Rapidmon, sixth was Leviamon X, seventh was Red Hybrid, eighth was Mirage, ninth was Red Hybrid, now we're getting into the new territory, 10th was also Red Hybrid, 11th was Diva, 12th was Lugimon, 13th was also Lugimon, 14th was another Security Control, 15th was Numemon X, or Numemon, and then 16th was your Armor Rush, your Vmon Armor Rush. So as far as the only decks of interest, Belphmon obviously being one of the decks to actually break into top 16, he kind of doesn't look any different from when we last saw him. He just had to make up a couple of tools. So he's using Analog Youth to cycle through the deck, using Raremon to dig through the deck, using Kaiser Leomon as just an alternative way to just kind of win, because you have ways to play and use your Karada Tamer, as well as the full Gizumon package, a couple of good rookies, and Ukamon to round things out. So that was the Belphmon list, and as far as Rapidmon, I already showed it last week, so we don't need to talk about that. So pretty decent results overall, but we did just have a new tournament. This is one that I competed in. It is the Core TCG event from April. I ended up getting 28th place. Just missed top 16. This event was kind of a really weird and interesting event. And this event really highlights the consolidation in the meta. So as far as the top 16 archetypes, we have 5 Numemon, 3 Divas, 3 Mirage Gaugamons, 2 Yellow Vaccines, 1 Rapidmon, 1 Beelzemon, and 1 Red Hybrid. We actually have the full big archetype breakdown. I'm not going to go over that because that's a lot, but I will just highlight a couple of the most played decks. So you could kind of take this information, do what you want with it, but we could see that Red Hybrids was the number 1 represented deck, on top of Numemon being the second most represented, Leviamon being the third, Fenrir Lugimon being the fourth, and Mirage Gaugamon being the 5th most represented deck. So those are the 5th most represented decks in that, and going forward, that's probably a safe bet on what you're most likely to face, on top of everything else that's kind of topped and has done well. But as far as what actually won that event, it was Numemon winning again. Then you have Divas coming in second, Rapidmon coming in third, Mirage coming in fourth, Mirage again coming in fifth, Beelzemon coming in sixth, Divas coming in seventh, Yellow Vaccine coming in eighth, Red Hybrid coming in ninth. This was the Red Hybrid that I lost to in round 7. Then you have Mirage Gaugamon coming in 10th, Numemon coming in 11th. This was the Numemon I lost to in round 6. Then you have 12th was Numemon, 13th was Numemon, 14th was Numemon, 15th was Yellow Vaccine, 16th was Diva. I think one of the Mirages, I think it was the 10th place Mirage, was the Mirage I actually beat in round 5. So I faced 3 of the top 16 players when I played the event. So it was a pretty decent event. Kind of ran short because it was 384 players, but only 7 rounds of Swiss. So there was just literally enough ties and top tables to just cut out 2 rounds. And as far as my overall performance, like I said, I think I did pretty good. I went X-2. I thought X-2 was going to end up being good enough to get me into top 16, but I was wrong because there was just a lot of X-1s because of the ties. And basically, if you weren't X-1 in this event, you were just hard-boned and you were never going to get into top 16, which kind of brings us to like the main topic of like how X-1 just isn't good enough to get into top 16, which makes it really hard to get that invite. And I get that some people already got their invite and some people technically got their invite twice, and Digimon does have pass down, but it's just very difficult. So if anyone was curious on what I was playing Red Hybrids, and I have uploaded, and I'm going to be uploading some of my matches on YouTube, so if you want to see some of those, feel free to check out the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, and I have my deck list and my matchup breakdown there as well. So, but yeah, top 16, not good enough to get, or I wasn't good enough this time to get into top 16 with an X2 record. I think that's kind of interesting. I know you play a couple of other card games. I don't know how their like full-on tournament structure works, Mark. So I know you're more familiar with Bushiroad, so if you want to like have any comments on how to actually be competitive from the Bushiroad side of things and what trying to go to like regionals and nationals looks like, by all means. I'm not anywhere near the Bushiroad expert as you are.
Well, I won't claim to be an absolute expert, but I guess on this particular topic, that does make me an expert. But no, on the same topic of that, you probably aren't too far off base. The last time that I went to regionals, which you don't need an invite for regionals, but you do need to, I believe it's, again, top 16 in regionals gets you an invite to Worlds. But it's about the same thing from my experience in the Bushi tournaments, where X and 2 can be good enough to get you into top 16, but the last event I was in, I think there was maybe 2 individuals that made it to the top, the final rounds, the top 16 cut, that were X and 2. Everybody else was X and 1, with the exception of, I believe, 2 individuals who were undefeated.
Okay.
So there were, I mean, it's definitely the case, I believe, and that was for Weiss, and I think it was relatively true as well for Vanguard. Almost everybody who made it to top in their respective events, pretty much everybody was X and 1.
Yeah, I don't know how big Bushy events get. I wanted to go back in my Buddy Fight days, but I missed like the one opportunity to go. Not that I was like sad about it, it just life happens. How big are usually Bushy events by any chance?
The last regional I went to, let's see, Overdress probably had, I would say, let's see, they had 300 tables marked out for pairs, so I think there was close to 600 people for the event. Um, Premium and V series, they were a little bit smaller. I think more in the 2 to 300 range, and then the Weiss event was more in the 250 200 range. The event I went to, there was Shadowverse, but we're not going to talk about that because I think Shadowverse had a total of like 32 people.
Oh gosh.
But in fairness, to my understanding, for that particular event, you actually had to win an invite to Shadowverse Regionals, whereas all of the other card games, it was open. You just had to show up.
Okay, because for the most part, Digimon is open. You just register, pay the money, and you're good to go. And unfortunately, in the past, Digimon was 512. That was the cap for the online regionals. In person, usually is capped at 256 or something like that. But they decided for whatever reason to decrease the cap to like 384, which is a really weird and arbitrary number. I still will not understand that unless they publicly say why, because round count wise it's the exact same. It's an estimated 9 rounds. So it sounds like Bushy is in that same type of vein where it's an estimated about 9 rounds.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think the same could be said about the Bushi side of things. It seems like maybe there's a few less rounds just because of the number of people. It seemed like the Bushi events went to 7 rounds and before they went to the top cut.
Okay. Yeah, Digimon doesn't really have Top Cut. It's just well, they do sometimes for some events. Because I was taking a look at all of our regionals and seeing how many players actually had an X2 record and got into top 16. Now, granted, I was also looking at some of the like global areas that use the English version of the card game. So in the core April event, out of the 384 players, because of ties, the lowest record was X-1 after 7 rounds. Then the Texas in-person regional, the lowest record was X11, again, also at 7 rounds, but it had 254 people. Then you had the Spain Mana Vortex regional. The lowest record was X2 at 7 rounds, 188 people, and only 4 people made it into top slots with the X2 record. Then we have the Nest in Mexico. We don't exactly have what the lowest record was, but we do know it was 6 rounds, and there was actually a top cut for top 8 out of 128 people. TAC, the lowest record was again X2, 126 people, and this time 6 people with the X2 record made it into top 16. Raid and Trade, same story as the Nest, no actual record data. And then the March core regional, the lowest record was X2 after 8 rounds, and only 6 people with X2 made it into top 16. So it seems like even if you do get into top 6, get an X2 record, that still might not be good enough, depending on tiebreakers and all that fun tournament jazz that I still will never understand. And it usually is not a very high percentage or number of people who get into top 16 with X2. The most that we've seen was 6. 6 out of 16, that's not even 50% of top 16 having an X2 record. I think it's like close to 60%, which that's still not great odds.
Yeah, definitely. The odds aren't against you, are definitely against you. I mean, as far as I always knew in tournament play, the common saying was if you're not X2, you might as well just drop because there's no way in hell you're gonna make it. But at the same time, I guess I personally think that it makes sense. You definitely want the best of the best to be making it into that top cut, and there's always the chance that you get good RNG, or you just happen to always run against your positive matchups, and your deck might not be like super meta relevant, but it just for some reason you're just hitting all 20s that day. So I think with the higher record cap of kind of demanding that X1 record in order to make top cut helps kind of reduce the amount of it helps weed out some of the more like players that are making it there on luck versus maybe skill. But there's definitely some RNG and luck into what factors into whether the players will make it to that top cut. But your top cut should be theoretically you'd want the best of the best to be making it there. So I don't see any reason why not to support having the better records make it. Obviously, it's not in everybody's favor because if you have to go X1, it's like, well, crap, I have one match to lose and I already lost. And say you already lost it on round three because you went up against your worst matchup. It's like, well, crap, I get a bad roll of the dice again. I could just be done.
Yeah, and I think like part of my problem with needing X and 1 to basically guarantee your invite, like it's super cutthroat, and I know this is a very common complaint in the Digimon community. This is probably news to you a little bit, Mark, but we just want more events. Like I think being top 16, needing the invite is fine if they had enough events to back it up, giving us enough opportunities. I'm not saying they're not trying their hardest or doing a better job. It's just we want more opportunities to play. And as we kind of already like calculated in previous episodes of the podcast, like to fill up even 500 people with the amount of events that we had, it's just not going to even happen. Which does make it look really awkward. The fact that you can't even have a full event because you didn't run enough events to get enough people into top 16. I think this is why they're trying store championships, but we have no idea what store championships is even going to look like. We know the cap is 64 people, but we don't know where you have to place in order to get your invite. And like store championships in the past, it was the first place person, but there was enough of them where enough people could get first place. Or like you could have enough attempts to be able to get to first place, especially when the tournament's a lot smaller scale. But even if they do like top 8 out of 64, I think that's pretty generous. And the fact that that doesn't exactly scale properly with regionals just makes regionals look bad as a whole. I personally would like if they're going to be not increasing the amount of events for regionals to give us the opportunities. I'm okay with top 32 getting invites, but that's just me being a little bit salty, just missing out on top 16 again, because I have a bad habit of missing it.
This is more maybe not necessarily a discussion on X2 being not being good enough to make top cut in this instance. Maybe it's more a matter of there's not enough events to fill out all of the slots if all they're doing is doing top 16 cuts.
Well, I don't know what their whole plan and goal is because it's very obvious that Bandai is giving One Piece all of the love, and right now they're just paying attention enough to Dragon Ball to be able to get that up and running using some of the structures that is already established from their other card games. So I actually have no idea what their goal is for Nationals this year because last year Nationals, they basically made it almost like a mini convention where like you come in, you have your invite, you're already registered, and then everyone else kind of just comes in with basically a spectator thing, and there's just a whole bunch of like other stands and uh shops and other stuff that you can kind of do in the meantime while you're waiting for your next round or whatever. So it was pretty interesting on how they were running it, but I don't know if they're going to repeat that again this year or not. So I guess it's just dependent on what their actual end game is for nationals. Because obviously Worlds is like it's Worlds. It's gonna be the most cutthroat. They've kept it the same forever, where it's just first and second place of nationals gets it.
If they're not filling up all of the slots that they have opened when they do regionals, maybe that's being done intentionally, where they're saying, "Hey, we have, you know, 384 slots open. Theoretically, based on the way we're running events, we're only ever going to hope or plan on having 300 of those slots filled, but maybe certain events turn out a certain way where things happen and you might get some extras, or you'll have some people drop out, but maybe their whole plan might be not to really ever fill to capacity. That way maybe it's more of like a management side of things, where they don't want to feel completely overwhelmed when they're running the regional events. But on that topic, in terms of more events, maybe something that they could try to do is have a larger tournaments. Maybe larger tournaments, if they reach a certain cap, you could, instead of doing the top 16 make the cut, maybe, like you said, you could bump it up to the top 32 make the cut, because the event is, you know, X bigger than your standard event, therefore we can take a larger number of players.
Oh,
Or
there's no way in heck that they're going to be increasing the events when they just decrease them. Because our
I
cap
mean,
our
you're not
cap used
wrong.
to be 512, and then they artificially lowered it to 384. And like round wise, it's still the same rounds. So I have no idea why they artificially decreased it. My theory was because of pricing. They just didn't print as much pricing, and they needed to like stretch and last. But that's just conjecture. I'll actually never know unless Bandai comes out and says it, which we already know that they won't. Um, as much as it would be nice to have a bigger event, like I just don't think that they're gonna do it. Um, which is why I'm like, okay, if you're not going to be running more events, and I think we did the math last time where it's just like based on the number of events and the number of top 16 participants, like the tournament would barely hit 200 people, which I guess, sure, if they're trying to go for a smaller event, that's fine. But why limit yourself when you could make the game bigger, especially if all we want to do is just play?
I mean, that's a very fair question. The only reasonable answer that comes to mind for me is they simply just don't have the capacity to support it. Like you said, a lot of their resources sound like that they're going to the One Piece games, so maybe they're artificially cutting what Digimon's capacity is, just so that they never reach that top level, so they don't have to worry about resources for Digimon being taxed when they're trying to reallocate them towards One Piece, if that's their primary focus.
I mean, that's fair. It just kind of sucks because I'm sure a lot of the other Bushy game or not Bushy Bandai games are kind of also in that similar type of position. Considering by the end of this year, they're gonna have 6 card games. 6. Like, I'm no expert, but that's a lot. And I know Bandai's a big company, but I also know Bandai doesn't put that much resources into each of the divisions. And I do know they are different divisions. Like, there's just this big card game division, and then they have the different subsects, but like they're not huge divisions like we generally like to try to picture. It's probably only just a small handful of people working on each card game. And that's kind of why we get the approach that we have. And I think that the new director, based on the change in communication, on how we're actually getting top 16s, and like the new director is definitely doing a better job than the old one at managing the card game. It's just I'm still just baffled at the limitations that they are just placing on Digimon, hampering its overall growth. And Bandai does this for all of their card games too. Like Masters, that game just barely gets enough support to keep going. Like their events are capped at like 205 or something stupid. Like it's another artificial number that doesn't really mean anything. It's small, and I think they decreased the number of events. I don't know. I could be wrong. I haven't looked into Masters in a while, but like they're really trying to use those same type of resources probably to support Fusion World. And then Union Arena is coming up, so and on top of Battle Spirits just barely existing, like we could pretend that Battle Spirits is big, but we already know it's not. Like it's very clearly dead last in the arms race for TCGs, but for whatever reason, Bandai wants to put a lot of support into that game because it's their own IP, and I get that, but it's just not a good decision when you could put that same level of resources towards some of the other stuff that's doing better.
No, that's a fair point, but like you said, it's their original IP, and you probably know as well as anybody, if you own your own IP and you're going to put your heart and soul into it, and by God, this game could be literally catching fire, and people are starting to drop nuclear bombs on it, but by God, we're going to spend every freaking penny we can reasonably ask for to save this floundering game, which I'm sure they're going to try and do. But like you said, having 6 different games and having a very limited budget and resources in order to manage all of them, I guess it's a real struggle for them to figure out, okay, well, what game do we put the resources towards? Digimon is 4 years old. One Piece is a lot newer.
One Piece is about it's hitting its second year. Shockingly enough. I think its second year is almost done because, yeah, it's hitting set 7. Yeah, it's hitting set 7 or 8 in Japan. So, yeah, it's about 2 years old then.
So it's about half as old as the Digimon TCG then.
Yeah.
So it might be that they're trying to keep facilitating that growth because the game is still quote unquote new, and maybe Digimon's just kind of getting getting put on coast mode, where it's like, okay, we feel like the game is doing well, the player base is, I'm not going to say happy, but they seem to be moderately satisfied, and they keep coming to events, and they still keep buying, the new sets. Everything seems fine, so we're just going to let them do what they're going to do, and I don't know, it's this weirdness of being one of the older games and pretty well established. I feel like they're not necessarily neglecting the game, but they're not going to give it the same level of attention as a lot of the other games is getting, because they are newer. They're trying to build as much of a following as they can before it probably reaches this pseudo artificial cap on how new the game is, because once the game reaches like a certain age, it's like, okay, now the game's out for a while, it's going to be harder to draw new players in, because they're going to be so many sets behind, they're going to have so many cards they're going to need to get in order to be able to be viable and competitive.
That's a decent assessment, I would say. But like, if it's one thing that I took to heart from Bushiroad card games, is the fact that like when you do too much, the game, like all of the games in the communities, definitely feel what is getting the most love. And it never feels good being the sibling that's left to their own devices in the corner of the room fiddling with their Lego blocks, where the other one is basically getting head pats, hugs, and kisses, and being thrown up into the air, and being caught in like a giant extravagant blanket that also is doubling as a slide. Like it does feel very awkward. And not everything is going to get the same amount of love and attention, which is why Bushiroad has had a very bad habit on killing a lot of their card games that they have made because they can't support, like, Bushiroad has a hard time supporting 3 card games. Bandai's saying, hold my beer, let me double that and see if I can be successful. Like, I'm just sitting here, I'm like, what? Excuse me? Like, the big 3 is still the big 3, and, like, I get that it's, right now, competitive card games is in this really weird spot where Magic is basically, the competitive scene is dead. It's gone. We could pretend that it's still kind of existing, and it sort of is. They're trying. But if you want that 1v1 experience, I think like literally every other card game is offering that in strides because of Magic's attention to Commander versus every other format. And um, Yu-Gi-Oh is like barely even a playable game, so I'm not even going to comment on that because that's just a mess. Pokemon seems like out of the 3 is in like the best spot. I don't know what their meta is, but like a lot of people like Pokemon's organized play structure where you're not necessarily fighting for an invite, you're just fighting for points. And if you top enough, or like not necessarily top enough, if you get good enough records, like if let's just say, oh, anyone out of this type of event, like a 512 person event, if anyone gets X in 2, they are just awarded, like, let's just say 5 points. I don't know how it actually is, but like, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing where it's just like, yeah, okay, I didn't get top 16, but because my record was X2, same as a person who made it into top 16, I still get enough points. And if I'm able to repeat that performance, then I could get enough points to then basically buy my invite with the points that I have accumulated.
So instead of having the players or basically win their invites per invitational, it would be more of a collective. Hey, I've gone to enough events. I've done good enough in all of these events. Give me my invite.
Yeah,
Which,
because I think like the big thing is the fact that we're just so discouraged now for getting X in 2. X in 2 basically almost means that you don't get your invite. I say basically because some still do, but like think of how many X2s have missed when only a small handful of X2s actually got it. And it just feels very weird and arbitrary saying like, "Oh, this person and this person had the same record. The only difference was their tiebreakers." So, because the other person's tiebreakers were a little bit better, they are now deemed the better player? Like, it doesn't sound right. And that just might be me being me, and wanting like a better organized play structure, because Bandai's is not the greatest and they keep changing it every year to try to make it better. I'm just like, just do a point system. Like, a lot of people like Pokemon's point system. Just copy that instead of trying to do your own oversimplified thing that only pisses people off because you don't have enough events to actually fill out the numbers you need.
oh, and I think that type of system, from what I'm understanding, would actually probably benefit the player base because then they would get to, theoretically, you'd get to play more events. It's not determinant of, oh, hey, I didn't top this event, therefore I have to go to another event to get my invite. It's a good incentive to incentivize those players, or it's rewarding the players that want to play in those more events to go out and it's like, okay, I have to be like top 32 in 5 events in order to, well, maybe a little bit more than top 32, but I have to do quite well in say 5 events in order to get enough points uh, for my invite, which I think from what I'm understanding, that would satisfy a lot of what the players sound like they're looking for. It would allow for more invites to take place. I do wonder, would doing that type of system make the game any less competitive?
No, because it would encourage people to want to play more. And part of the reason why I'm kind of like I like the idea of a point based system is because right now there's barely incentive to actually join regionals, literally outside of the fact that they just introduced serialized Omnimon, or like serialized prize cards, and then the invite. Like those are literally the only two pieces of prizing that actually makes participating in a regionals like worthwhile. Like they have just released the information on the second um, regional like participation prize, and it's not good. Like the cards in there are probably not going to be highly sought after, just because they're older cards and some of those cards just aren't even being used. So it's like there's one good card and then the rest is kind of bulk. And this wave of participation is also in the same vein. And the stamp changes from participation to finalist if you hit top 32, and then from finalist to champion if you're like in top 16 or top 8. So it's like there's not really, outside of event packs being the only additional prizing, um it's just a very top heavy prizing structure, and for regionals it feels absolutely miserable to be a part of. It's just like, cool, I went X and 2, that wasn't good enough to get my invite, I suck as a player, I'm gonna have to try again, and the prizing's not worth, like, it's not really worth it. So like if I had won my invite, I would stop going to events. Like that's basically it. I got my invite, I got the one thing I wanted, and now I'm done because the pricing isn't worth it. So this would encourage players to want to try to participate more, even though the pricing sucks. It just encourages more participation because you have more opportunities to be able to rack up enough points to be able to get the invite, even though you didn't get it in one fell swoop. Because, like, let's just say they do points based on placements. Well, it's just like, okay, top 16 automatically gets you enough points to get your invite. That's basically the same thing. But anyone who's like in top 32, if they top 32 like 2 or 3 more times, like, I think honestly that person also should get their invite. So that's just my 2 cents on it. Because I know Bushiroad does things similar to Bandai, where it is just more cut and dry, just hyper simplified.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I went to regionals before even the first round started, they basically handed out your, hey, thank you for showing up. Here's your participation prize, and then your top placers, I believe, got an uh, additional prizing for placing well. But that also makes for another interesting topic of doing prize support because I think that can definitely generate interest in people wanting to go to events. Like you said, if the prize support is good, people are willing to go. But at the same time, where do you even out that prize support? Do you do something where, just showing up, hey, here you go, here's your promo. It doesn't fucking matter how well you do. You got your promo. Might not be the greatest thing in the world. We might have some better pricing at the top end if you do well, but you're at least guaranteed something for showing up, even if you don't, do well in the event. Or do you do something, kind of like you're saying, maybe have some of that better pricing support kind of spread throughout like top 16, and then everybody else just kind of doesn't get much of anything, but maybe have the prize support in a way where you have multiple events where you can do that top six, have that shot to try and get that top 16 to get the better prize support. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hate top heavy pricing, especially for events, because like top heavy pricing me it if you don't do well, it just makes the player feel insanely bad because like not everyone obviously is going to be able to get top 16, and not everyone who is able to get top 16 is going to get there consistently. That's just the nature of RNG and how tournaments are run, and there's just a whole bunch of different factors that go into it. So having it be more spread out, it kind of still rewards the players for giving a better attempt. Because, like, right now, I believe, like, oh, if you literally don't get into top 32 for regionals, your pricing is borderline garbage. Like, you'll get, like, 1 or 2 event packs based on how well you placed, and then you get your participation, like, promos. And the participation promos are not really worth it. They haven't been for a while, and this wave and the next wave are definitely not doing it. At least this one, there's an actual promo that's harder to get, that's making it more desirable to want to try to participate for that. But next wave, absolute garbage. Like, I don't even think the whole pack is going to sell for what your entry is. And then you look at that compared to One Piece, and like One Piece's pricing is like fantastic because the cards are already hard enough to get a hold of in terms of like the higher rarities and more desirable ones that are meta playable. So it's just like literally, I think like almost a year ago they reprinted a uncommon, and that uncommon, its base value was already like at $10. And then the regional had a nice alt art version of it, like as the participation. That participation prize was like $50. And I'm just like, Digimon doesn't have anything that drives that type of demand because of just the sheer level of, like, I don't want to say laziness, but like how unrewarding their pricing is.
Okay, so the pricing being not very rewarding definitely would be a major turnoff to the players, I would say. Because if you're gonna show up, the pricing isn't very good. It's literally, well, I showed up, crap, I didn't go X and 2, or it's only round 5, and I'm what 2 and 3 at that point. Well, there goes my entire day. It's completely wasted. If what you're going for is prize, going for the invitational, but at the same time, the pricing support should definitely be drawing the players there to want to participate, because, like you said, if the pricing support's garbage, you're not going to get as many players to show up.
Right,
And
because
then,
go ahead.
oh, I was pretty much done with my thought.
Oh, yeah, because like we have a couple of different tournament structures. They're not like actual tournaments. They're just literally labeled different events with some slightly different prizes. So we have regionals, which arguably has some of the worst pricing. They've been doing a little bit better on making it more interesting and enticing, but again, it's all top loaded. And you have something like an Ultimate Cup where the participation prize by default is just better because it's it's generally a more desirable card because it's a nice alt art, it's stamped, and like it actually looks like a prize, versus like the lazy background color changes that they generally do, where it's just like, yeah, so here's the base art, just strip away the background and let's just throw purple on it because it's a purple card. It looks so lazy, and then they just throw a stamp on it. It doesn't, stuff like that doesn't create demand or value, especially when they choose really bad cards too. Like Digimon already is a fairly cheap game. It's trying to get more expensive. And you definitely can feel it's trying to get more expensive with some of the decisions that have been made in the last couple of sets. But it's trying to get more expensive, but at the same time, like, there's no reason why we can't have more desirable cards as, like, participation, or just, the different stamps, having different, like, different cards. So it's just like, why couldn't, participation be one set of promos, then finalist be another set of promos that you also get with the participation, and then another set. Like, it doesn't make it feel any more desirable. And like, if it literally wasn't for the invite dangling over my head every single regional, I wouldn't play in them. I wouldn't waste my time.
Sounds like you're definitely in favor of Bandai completely reassessing how they handle doing the tournaments and pricing support, and just completely coming back and reworking it from the ground up to make it a lot more approachable. I guess might be the term that I use, approachable for the players, because you want it to be inviting. You want to have a bunch of players show up. You want them to have a good time. You want them to show up to multiple events, because that's a good gauge for saying that your game is doing well. Because if you have one event that 200 people show up to, and then you have another event that's just a couple days later, and it's like, well, 10 people showed up. What happened? And like you said, if literally the only thing that is incentivizing people to show up to these events is that invitational, I feel like it's not going to be as enticing to as many players, because I think there's a fair number of players that know that they might be good, but they're not like top 16 good per se. They're a solid like X-3 player. They're working their way there, but if there's no prizing support and they know that they're not getting that invitational, there's not a whole lot of incentive for them to show up, other than maybe, hey, I can practice, but I could also practice like online. I don't have to show up to the event and like waste my whole day here.
Well, most of Bandai's events, at least for Digimon, are online. There's only a small handful that are actually in person, and no matter what, this is the only thing I kind of can like give Bushiroad some like good on you for being smart. Is the fact that we're paying like $30 for each regional attempt, and the fact that like, oh, at least Ultimate Cup the pricing is better, but there's no invite attached to it. So it's just like, we get better pricing, it entices more players to join, but there's no real competitive reason to join outside of the pricing. But like, that's the whole pull of the tournament. And then you have regionals, which has butt pricing, and the only thing that's making it worthwhile is the serialized card now and the invites. So it's just like, there's just a very clear imbalance. And like, I know Bushy makes their events free, so it's very easy to already want to come in and join and play. You just have to take the time to travel out there.
Well, I was gonna say, I guess I was missing that point, that you guys are paying like $30 to get into an event. If you're paying that kind of money and there is no pricing support that is worth that kind of money, that I feel like that would de-incentivize a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we're lucky that Digimon actually has a fairly competitive audience, um, that
So you
keeps
have
the
people that
tournament.
want to show up.
Yeah, like, you have people that just want, like, we just want to play the game. We want to have fun and be rewarded for it. And tournaments is like one of the easiest ways to do that. And Bandai is just really bad at running and managing tournaments. And the problem is, this is exacerbated because of all of the different games that they have and not enough TOs to run them all. So like, we used to have our core tournaments was literally core, Top Cut, and Carta Magica. And they were the three main TOs that were running Digimon. Well, Carta Magica is no longer running Digimon because they don't have the time to run Digimon, because they're focused on other card games like One Piece, and like, I think they're doing Dragon Ball as well, and maybe Battle Spirits or something else. But regardless, like, their schedule is full, and Digimon is not on that schedule. So now they had to try to find another TO, income Play TCG, to try to pick up that slack. Except Play TCG is also spread super thin every single time because they're also running multiple of their card games. So like, you have like only a small handful of TOs and not enough and too many games expecting the TOs to run all of them. And I know, like, I propose this where it's just like they literally should do the Bushiroad thing and just host their own freaking event. But Bandai, being the lazy Bandai that they are, they really don't want to do that.
Yeah. I don't think your thinking's too far off there. It, it kind of just goes back to what we were talking about earlier with just absolutely stretched resources, and when you don't have the resources to put into it, you're obviously not going to have the turnout that you want to see.
I mean, the events are selling out, so like that shows that there's still, even with lackluster pricing, demand to want to play the game, even when our player cap is reduced. Like, we all still want to play. Events still sell out really quickly. Um, and it's just, we just need more ways and opportunities to play. And I think a lot of the issues with the game can be alleviated just from having those opportunities. But because everything feels so cutthroat, is because there's not that many opportunities for players to be able to prove themselves. Like, if anyone's actually curious, my average on getting into top 16 is about once or twice a year. I'm a good player. I'm not a consistently good player. I could get into top 32 a couple of times, and top 64s, that's not a problem. But getting to that top 16, I only do it about once or twice a year, which barely gets me my invite. Assuming I got the luck in the right event. Because I could get like a top 16 in an Ultimate Cup, and then, oh, I might not be able to repeat a top 16 for the regional.
So, interestingly enough, you mentioned that most of the events are generally filled and, they're pretty well capped at the player cap. I had a question of, do you think perhaps that is actually hurting the Digimon players, that they are showing too much interest, and that's causing Bandai to look and say, oh, hey, look, we're putting next to nothing into Digimon right now, and it is just booming. So why should we bother putting any more resources into it because it's already doing amazing?
It's because, like, in my perspective, the game is actually still growing, and Bandai is bottlenecking their own growth because it all comes down to because we think that their resources are stretched too thin, running currently 5 games, about to be 6.
Right, but the point, I guess the question I'm asking is by showing that there is so much support and they are putting, it feels like less and less resources into it, but they're still getting growing returns. Do you think that that's causing them to say, hey, we can keep putting less and less resources into Digimon because it'll just keep going in the opposite direction of our attention?
Uh, no, because in my perspective, it feels like it's the reverse, where we have to give them as much attention as we possibly can. Otherwise, they'll just say, look, the game's not doing well, you're on the chopping block. And that's something nobody wants. Even though the game is doing well, like, we want to support it because we like the game, and we are constantly in conflict with Bandai because of the fact that we see the games growing. We see the audience is there, the demand is there, the players are there. They just aren't creating the opportunities for us to be able to get the game to where it needs to be. And I think, like, this is why I keep saying unification is going to be the most important year in Digimon's history. Like, in terms of the card game. Like, the start of the game already had some rocky starts because it was a COVID game. That's when it launched, was during COVID. It survived that, thankfully. And the game's been growing ever since, and it hasn't really stopped. It's had some ups and downs based on sets and where the community feels, but we have to, unfortunately, pay attention to the game. Otherwise, Bandai's going to shelve it. So if anything, they're strong arming the players into this type of behavior.
No, it's more so that everything is there. You guys are asking Bandai for more, and Bandai just kind of gives you the head turn of, we're just going to pretend we didn't see that, but we're glad to see what we're seeing.
Basically, at least that's how it felt. I think the new director definitely feels like they are putting more attention and love and care into it, but we won't see any of the fruits of the labor that the new director is going through until unification. Because, I mean, you know how card games work for the most part. Like, sets 18, because right now we just have set 17 spoiled. Set 18, 19, and 20 are probably all already done, or at least 18 and 19 are already done, and then EX7 is done in terms of like the actual cards core designs. So like the rest of the year is already done in terms of the work that Bandai is putting into it. And right now they're just looking at making more sets for next year, getting prepped for next year, and making all of those contracts and doing what they need to do to be able to keep the card game running.
Yeah, there's no question. Most TCGs are going to have multiple sets, already in production. Like you said, they might not be completely finalized, but they'll probably have 95% of all of the cards pretty much designed and figured out. If, the more whatever set is going to be coming out, I mean, there's a good chance that the set that's having spoilers leaked, it's already printed, and the one that comes out after it might very well be finalizing things on the press for that set. I mean, they got to have this stuff pretty well lined up in order to make sure it comes out when it's supposed to. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, because one of the things that I was looking at was I was looking at all of the other Bandai games and how they're currently being ran, just on a very surface level in terms of like their tournaments, and I noticed that both Dragon Ball and like Dragon Ball Fusion World, I think Masters also is best of one, and then One Piece is also best of one. Like, I know that's a very Japanese thing because they like quicker games, they don't like spending forever on something, but like the fact that their rounds are 35-minute best of ones allows the tournaments to run a little bit quicker. So maybe, I don't know if that's even a solution, is to put Digimon on that same path, but like Battle Spirits is best of 3 like Digimon. So maybe that's not exactly the answer. I don't know. I kind of wish like Bandai just had like a universal, like, this is just how things are going to be ran across the board between all of our games. I think that would make things way easier for pretty much everyone, because we already see them like unifying a lot of their words in terms of like, oh, these are Bandai keywords. Like, it doesn't matter what game of Bandai's you play, these just are the keywords. Obviously, you're going to have a couple of different ones per game, but like, blocker is the same in Dragon Ball as it is in One Piece as it is in Digimon. Like, that's just how the same terminology. And I feel like if they just shared like event structure, shared venue, shared more, maybe things could end up getting better. I know, like, I ran a poll asking if the community wanted to see Digimon go to best of one, if it meant a change in the organized play structure, whether that's shorter events and more events, or what be it. And the Digimon community does not want best of ones. We really don't. And I think that's fine. Not every game needs to be best of one, because to me, best of 3 is arguably more competitive. Like, sure, you could say that, oh, but One Piece as a game requires way more skill because of all of the other different factors. And I'm just like, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's still a TCG, and RNG is a bitch. I'm just going to say that RNG is still going to be a huge factor. And like one Digimon has its own different sets of RNG that really makes it so that you need to be on point and understand the game to be able to do well. It's its own skill is managing the RNG, and one way to manage it is through best of 3.
No, I 100% agree with you there. Pretty much every game that Bushi runs are all best of ones, which for Vanguard, I can kind of see it because some of the games they can kind of turn into stall fests, and before you know it, it's like, well, the 30 minutes is pretty much coming up, and we're still, on our first match. Weiss, it's almost mandatory because the game lasts so freaking long. I mean, a 30-minute game of Weiss is pretty standard. If you had to do best of 3 in Weiss, you would be there all frickin' day. But I think with the speed that Digimon has, and like you said, having that the best of 3 format helps eliminate a lot of that RNG, because I know in the events that I've gone to with Vanguard, you can just hit that good RNG, and it's like, well, I guess I win just because luck was on my side, not because I have a good deck, not because my opponent's been playing like garbage. I could literally be like missing half of my plays, misplaying constantly, and as long as I got good RNG and I just have to win that one game, easy. But if I have to do best of 3, it's like, okay, I got lucky in one game. That might not necessarily be repeatable. And I personally like that the best of 3 format because it requires consistency. It helps eliminate some of that luck factor, because now you have to perform twice. You have to succeed and win and beat your opponent 2 times.
And this is where a lot of the drama from Worlds kind of rears its ugly head, where going to time and overtime is actually it should be frowned upon, and TOs, spoiler alert, do not like it. When I was working on Argent Saga and I was doing and helping run their events, as an employee, because, when I'm not designing cards or balancing them, I needed to pay attention to the events, help run it, because we weren't a huge company. ARG was just a very still small thing, and my boss, he was red in the face when people were going to time. He did not like it. So I can imagine that other TOs, they might not be red in the face, but they're just like, really? Time? Again? The game really, Digimon as a game, granted, I play more aggressive decks. There's no real reason why it should go to time. Even in some of the more control-heavy matchups, there's not really that much of a reason why things should go to time. And oddly enough, in Digimon, decks are even rewarded for it, which I think is the extra scummy part. And there definitely needs to be some changes to the end of time procedures in order to de-incentivize going to time, and maybe that would help the tournaments run smoother. And if the tournaments ran smoother, then that could change just how records even play out, because now we don't have ties impacting records where it's just oh, I was X and 2, but I got bumped down because there was an X-1. So maybe that also is a fix that should be looked at and examined.
Yeah, I mean, I know Bushi just recently changed how they deal with doing ties. So what they ended up doing is they added an additional 5 minutes to the rounds, but they changed the ruling to when you hit time, it is considered a double loss. You get a loss, your opponent gets a loss. And I think that is definitely probably what you're alluding to, because the whole purpose of the time limit is essentially we have determined through a multitude of games and matches that on average a it should only take this amount of time in order for you to complete all of your matches. There should be no reason that anybody gets rewarded for going to time and getting a tie. You should be incentivizing players to play quickly. Now, obviously, you have decks that are more control based. They're going to run a little bit slower. You're going to have to think about your plays, but you shouldn't be just stalling for time because you're going to get a benefit out of it. The whole reason for those time limits is so that we can keep the event moving at a reasonable speed, at a reasonable pace, so we're not here super late. So I kind of like that change of rule that Bushi did, where now it's more, and I mean, nothing says that it still can't be abused by somebody trying to just stall for time. It's like, oh, I'm going to give my opponent a worse record, but I'm also going to take a hit. You shouldn't be incentivizing players for going to time. You should be incentivizing players to finish their matches well before you get to that point.
And I actually like, I know this is going to be a really hot take, but I kind of like that idea where if you do go to time, it is a double game loss. I think that's like, just the fact that it eliminates ties already changes how records play out, and maybe that's just the shift that we would need. But I know going to time is like absolutely the worst thing ever, and you should be punished for it. Granted, the argument is then, why would people want to play control decks? Because they go to time more often than not not necessarily because they're playing slow, but the opponent could be playing slow because it's forcing the opponent to be more thought inducive towards their turns. But like, that's why I know a lot of Digimon people might not actually like it, but I feel like if you're the deck that's purposely trying to go to time, like security control, that's literally designed to do nothing but stall, it's not even trying to win, it's trying to stall. I think players should get punished for that type of playstyle, because you're intentionally elongating the matches and the games to try to cheese a win in, like, this, in my perspective, the scummiest way possible, by abusing the game's, like, the tournament rules, and, like, by extension, some of the game's rules too. It doesn't feel right.
No, I definitely would agree with that point, but that does raise up the question of trying to find that fine balance, because you don't want to punish people for wanting to play control decks because they're going to run a little bit slower. You don't want to have that, like, that piano hanging over their head, like, oh, you can play this control deck, but you better be careful because you might get punished for it because your opponent could also be playing control, and you both go to time. I mean, obviously, if you're both playing control, you should be able to recognize that pretty quickly. And it's like, oh crap, if we're both playing control, we're going to have to play a little bit quicker. The game might be a little sloppier, which can definitely open up some interesting opportunities, because then, the players aren't having all of that time to sit there and think about the turns. Kind of like when you play chess on a timer. When you have that timer looming over you, it's like, well, I'm thinking about all of my plays on my opponent's turn, and I'm just going to hope that they don't throw me a big old curveball, because I only have so much time to spend doing my turn, doing my moves on my turn. So it definitely can throw some interesting aspects into it, but I would be curious to see how much that would change the dynamic if ties were completely removed from the equation, because I'd imagine figuring out, like, who's doing the best in the tournament becomes a lot easier when it's just, okay, what's your win rate? What's your loss rate? What does it look like for your opponents? Because I know ties can really, make for some really goofy point calculations.
Yeah, I mean, point calculations are already kind of goofy with ties, because, like, point calculations with ties can just literally magically end tournaments 1 to even 2 rounds earlier, as we just saw with the last core TCG event. I was sitting there X and 2. I was just like, dang, I just came off of a loss. Cool. There should be one more round, and I could redeem myself, and maybe with my tiebreakers being really good, I could still try to squeak into top 16. Nope. Tie on top table, 100% out of my control. And I'm not going to say like the tie costed me the invite, because I lost. That was partially my fault. I mean, granted, I was a little bricked up, but I was the one who ended up losing, and like I'm sure other people are in that type of position, similar to me, where it's just like I thought I did well, and then all of a sudden the tournament ends, and then your record is way worse than you would have thought. Because if you had that extra round, you could have done better because of the elimination of ties. And maybe because of the elimination of ties, it makes things go smoother. Even though the round count technically could be increased, because there's no ties to decrease it. But again, that changes the dynamics and gives you more opportunities to try to perform better. Because it seems like, based on some of that data that I was talking about earlier on player count and round count on how many X2s, it seems like generally you had more people with X2 the more rounds that go on. So that gives that opportunity where, okay, now X2 actually means I still could potentially get my invite, versus I'm at X2, there's a high chance I actually don't get my invite. And that changes the player psychology on, is this run worth it to just drop and quit here, or should I keep pressing and continuing?
Yeah, and if you have the tournaments running smoother and you don't have all of these, oh well, people went to time. Uh, I don't know. In Digimon, when you go to time, is it just considered a tie at that point? There's no
There's
additional
overtime.
turns.
Yeah,
Okay. How do,
there's like 5 minutes overtime, three turns, whichever happens first, and then tie happens basically if there's no declared winner after that. And then for like hyper specific situations, like worlds, they'll do like, oh, so now we're gonna start counting specific parameters to see who's going to end up being the winner. Who has the most, I think it's like who has the most security, most cards in deck, most Digimon on field. They just have like a little laundry list that you go through and see who is the winner, artificially, without the game actually ending, based on those parameters. Which, again, some of them, like cards and security being the first check, puts control decks in favor, and they're the ones that are causing the games to go to time. So they're being rewarded for causing the stalling, like the stall out and games going to time.
True. But I mean, how often do these heavy control-based decks tend to top in most tournaments?
Uh, like I've seen enough data from enough events throughout the years to know that most of the time those heavy stall decks like security control, if they are ever in top 16, most of the time it's usually towards the very bottom of top 16. It's never or rarely the top. Like it'll win every now and then, and sometimes it'll get into the middle, but the majority of time it's going to be towards the bottom of top 16.
So not necessarily that the control decks are really making it to top 16. They're just, I guess, for a lack of a better way of saying it, they're just a nuisance to everybody else in the higher tables.
Yeah. I mean, even in like smaller events, like I participated in a locals like a couple of weeks ago, and it was again very top heavy prizing, and my first round was against security control, and we ended up tying, and that tie basically was a double loss because we both goofed ourselves out of the top heavy prizing because of that tie, making it so we'll never have enough points to be labeled as undefeated. So that tie basically just ruined both of our runs just because the opponent decided to play a control based deck. So they ended up causing themselves and me to lose out on the prizing, and it felt really bad. I'm not gonna lie, it felt awful.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't want to de-incentivize people for wanting to play a certain style of deck. I mean, I don't think that people should be punished for something like that unless they're playing something incredibly toxic, like a tier 0 deck where it's like there's really no reason you shouldn't be playing this deck. This deck just wins. I mean, even against itself, it just wins. But if people want to play control, I mean, that should totally be their option. But I think a change in structure in de-incentivizing ever going to time. I mean, you want to make sure that when players are playing, they are finishing their matches well before time is called, because that just makes everything drag on, and then, getting to the next round takes even longer, and then the tournament ends up running even longer because of that, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we're running an hour behind what we're supposed to be. We're like, 2 rounds behind where we're supposed to be because every single round has gone to time. I think I think you should find a way to de-incentivize people to go to time, and then you'll have a lot less of those issues. Will you see less people possibly playing control because of that? It's very possible, but you could very well see just the same amount of people wanting to play control, because it's like, well, if I just play a little bit faster, play a little bit different, I won't be too heavily punished because of these changes.
I mean, that's partially why I just generally am always in favor of aggro decks, because like I know I'll rarely ever go to time, and like games do end quick enough while feeling rewarding enough, because I've had games end in like 5 minutes, and that feels kind of crappy. But I've also had games end in 55 minutes, and that also still feels very bad. So it's just like I feel like, yeah, there kind of does need to be a better middle ground in terms of the rulings that TOs or like Bandai has to incentivize more prompt play, I guess. So that way, like, because Digimon has like it's very interesting on its dynamics between control aggro and mid range, in which mid range technically doesn't exist. It's more combo based, and like some of the newer control decks actually are designed to try to end the game, and I really like that idea. But some decks that Bandai didn't necessarily design, um, those are the more interesting control decks that generally don't have that win condition, um, because it's not built into it, because that was something the community made up, like security control, because it's like Leviamon is a control deck. I 100% think that that deck is a control deck, but the fact that Leviamon has built-in security attack +2 means it's dealing 3 damage, kind of says that, hey, I'm going to control the field and then beat your face in. And that's kind of just the pattern that Digimon seems to want to be in, where it's just like, okay, there's this power dynamic between what's on the field and what can be done to the field. And then whoever kind of wins that, not really war of attrition, but whoever wins that strategy on how to bait the opponent out of their power play so you could capitalize on that. I think that's the true heart of Digimon.
Well, and I think with the creative capacity of card games, you'll find players coming up with very unique and interesting strategies, even strategies that wouldn't necessarily be considered on meta. I mean, from my understanding, security control isn't necessarily a meta strategy, but it is a relatively viable strategy. It has the consistency to perform, but maybe not to the same level as decks in the same vein as you're describing, where I'm going to control the field. I'm going to make it so that I'm ahead, and then I'm just going to make sure that you can't recover, and then just totally kill you because of it.
Yeah, and they're designing cards to try to tackle that type of design problem, I'll just say. Because that's what like warp abilities are for, where it's just like, oh, this could just warp me back up into a mega, so I just need to hold something in raising, and then I can start trying to get back into the game, even though the stack isn't going to be as efficient as if I didn't, but it requires obviously less resources to do. And then they have scramble training card, or not training cards. They have the scramble cards to also have a way to be able to reset yourself in case you do just get blown out, because blowouts also kind of feel bad in of themselves. So they're still trying to find ways to be able to tackle the problem while making it feel rewarding in a way. And like, there's not many decks that are that, in quotation marks, off design, I'll just say, because for the most part, Digimon does have a more linear design to it, as we kind of mentioned last week, with the whole balance versus flavor, where it's just like they design evolutionary lines to play with the same Digimon in the same evolutionary line from a different set. And that's kind of how decks end up building themselves, with a couple of supplementary cards here or there, depending on what kind of generic tech that you need to flesh out what that deck is trying to do. And there's not many colors and decks outside of like purple and yellow that really can go outside of those lanes to be able to do something that the deck wasn't generally able to do. Granted, there are like some small changes that you can make to try to add in those more generic cards to be able to fulfill a particular role, but that comes at the cost of consistency, because now it's off brand, it's off archetype, and you just have to hope to see it when and without having the best ways to be able to grab it. So, but I think all of this does kind of contribute to just the overarching issue that organized play is constantly changing, and it's still changing, and next year it definitely will be changed. I don't know if Bandai's going to try to take the unification approach with all of their games. I think Dragon Ball Fusion World starting with unification and Digimon getting it are definitely two really big tests to see what they're trying to do. But I think like just the prospect on having everything be on the same level is something that I am definitely looking forward to. And I really hope that even if this year isn't necessarily super scuffed, because we're only about halfway in as far as the information that we have. So we're only about halfway into this year. There's still going to be plenty more events, and things obviously can change in that later half. We don't know. There's still lots of time for things to come up. Maybe some of my issues will get alleviated with organized play. Organized play has always been a huge struggle between Bandai and the community, because we just want more opportunities to play, and they just, for whatever reason, aren't giving us those opportunities, and we have to pay for these also. So they're making money by us playing, which generally is good for the company, because now they could, feel like running these tournaments is worth their time and investment.
That's what the company's going to look for. I mean, obviously they're going to look for the player interaction, but at the end of the day, if they don't feel like they're making the money that they should on a particular game, obviously with some exceptions, they're going to start pulling resources and support from it slowly but slowly. And it's like, well, if it's not going to, things don't pick up, we're not going to keep putting the same level of resources and money into running this game.
Yeah,
So
which is why we have to keep supporting it, even if it is not necessarily the greatest to support. And that's all we want at the end of the day, is just for them to get better, to make it more rewarding for us, the players. And if that means changing a couple of things around, testing some different structures, fine. But hopefully things post unification will look a lot better, because that's when they need to put the most effort in. Because I think, like you said earlier, it does kind of feel like they are just letting Digimon coast in terms of its current like position. And I think maybe that's because they're doing some massive prep for unification and what's to come after that.
Entirely possible. I mean, like you said, with the new director coming in, they could definitely shake a whole lot of things up, and you know, maybe maybe Bandai has noticed that the Digimon competitive scene has gotten into this weird state, or perhaps maybe into a bit of a stale state, and they're trying to think of ways to completely overhaul or maybe make some minor changes here or there. Obviously, as big as the company is, they're not going to just like push out little things like one like piecemeal at a time. They're going to, they're really going to just dig in deep. If they're going to make changes, you know, they're going to make changes. They're going to make this swathing set of changes and just push them all out at once if they plan on doing anything, which generally would make the most sense. You don't want to just like, push little tidbits out here or there and just see how it goes. Or, you push something out, but it's like, it's kind of contingent on us also pushing this thing out. So why don't we just get all of the things that we want to change figured out, push it all out at once, see how things go, see if it improves things, see if it makes things worse, and then obviously we can document that, and we can, you know, come back to the drawing board with a fresh set of information.
Yeah, because if it's the one thing I know Bandai isn't, is stupid. They might be short sighted, but they're not stupid. And I am very interested in seeing what's to come later this year, because we're supposed to get some changes to Ultimate Cup. I have no idea if they're going to bring DC Cups back, because we had them for like a year and then they got rid of them for like no reason. They're trying to support more of a locals level with Evolution Cups on top of store, like larger store regionals. So there's still a lot of unknowns that obviously we haven't been informed of, and hopefully they can handle those tactfully enough to make the game feel more rewarding, so that way players obviously want to play more than what we already do.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a matter of just keep fighting the good fight, and hopefully some new changes come down the line that are things that the players are wanting to see.
Yeah, and that's all we could really hope for, is Bandai to listen, act on feedback, act on some of their past mistakes, and come up with some good ideas to be able to continue to engage the player base. But I think this is probably going to be a really good place to close things out on that little bit of a high. So I want to thank everyone for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to try to help support the podcast by sharing it with others on social media, making sure you leave that rating, like, subscribe, follow, whatever, on whatever platform you're choosing to watch or listen on. Thank you all again for listening, and we will see you next time.